Happy weekend, all my friends out there in the wonderful world of metrology. This is Kevin. You are listening to the weekend edition of the podcast, number 10. Today, we're going to talk about the delicate balance of calibrating balances.
It's been a long time coming. 6 days a week and 10 hours a shift. What about the OT? Well, it ain't worth this. This ain't no 9 to 5 out here on these production lines. So I told them where to shove it, then they could read between the lines.
All right, so welcome to this weekend version of the podcast. We're on number 10 for the weekend. Kind of cool. Title of this one, I'm calling it The Balancing Act of Calibrating Balances. And what I'm actually going to be talking about here is actually running a calibration lab, be it internal or external. But before we get down to that, let's talk about what we talked about this week on the podcast. So we talked about the slew method. This is where we take a calibration and kind of turn it upside down to reduce the issues of resolution of the unit under test. Very handy method to have. Good thing to have in your back pocket. Tuesday, we talked about the USA versus the metric system, and it might come as a surprise to you folks who think that the USA doesn't accept the metric system, that actually the entire imperial system is now based on the metric system. So there's a fun one. Wednesday, our equipment day. I talked about GPS disciplined oscillators. Really cool frequency standard that can bring some heavy hitting accuracy to pretty much any cal lab. Very fun stuff to have. Thursday, got into a little bit of uncertainty with Monte Carlo simulations, and then told you how you could actually come up with the value of pi using this Monte Carlo simulation. Kind of fun stuff. And then Friday kind of went on a little bit of a rant with one that's anybody can dig a hole. So, you can hand anybody the right calibration standards, the right stuff to use, but can they actually use it? It's a good question. There's a lot that goes into actually becoming a calibration technician. And speaking of a lot that goes into becoming a calibration technician, new ebook on the website, www.ptguruconsulting.com/ebook. Go over there, sign up, and you get a free ebook that I put together about the path to becoming an ASQ certified calibration technician. It's a good, brief little guide, lots of info in there. So stop by, check it out. Let me know what you think. Let me know how I'm doing with things just on the regular website. I very much appreciate you doing so. Let's get right down to some content and what we're going to talk about this weekend. And of course, this weekend, we're on the video. It's going to be going up on YouTube, and I'll also post it over on Facebook to get over to YouTube with it. But check out the video, kind of the weekend thing, and then I told you what was going on during the week, so you can, if you're interested, you can go back, check that out as well. So what I said we're going to talk about is kind of the idea of a successful calibration laboratory. And a successful calibration laboratory is a difficult thing to manage. Whether you're doing things as part of a larger organization in-house, where you're a cal lab maybe supporting processes and production, or you're an independent standalone service, aka a calibration laboratory, you're going to have some similar challenges. You're going to have a lot of stuff. I mean, been there, done that, spent a good part of my life doing that sort of thing on both sides of this sort of situation. So in-house, in lab, doesn't matter. Everybody wants it cheaper, faster, better, and they don't even know what the heck they mean when they say better. I want it better. Well, okay, what's your definition of better? I don't know, just I want better. Okay, thanks. I'll work on that. Everybody also seems to think that you're going to know exactly what they need. And that's one of the huge shortcomings in the back and forth between a calibration lab and the person that's maybe purchasing services or is needing those services. They tend to just think, oh, well, just calibrate it. Just do it. And they're not really telling you what they need, which can cause a lot of friction, especially in the long run, trying to figure out, hey, what are you looking for? And then, of course, when the audit comes, nobody's looking at their certs. And then, when they get hit, Who are they going to blame? They're going to blame the calibration lab. They're going to blame the calibration service. They're going to blame the outside service. They're going to blame the calibration folks because they didn't look at their stuff. So just things we need to keep in mind. Then, there's always the questions that come up. What do you mean you need to outsource it? You did one just like this last week. And this is always a fun one to deal with, especially when it's that, oh, well, you just did one like this. We'll talk about that here in a moment, how to deal with that situation, because it's a common one that comes up. Lots of things I share from you come from my experience as that third-party calibration lab. But that being said, the best internal labs I've seen and I've dealt with over the years function much like a third-party lab inside of a larger organization. They go and they treat the folks that they're performing calibration for like customers and not like coworkers. And that's a really important distinction, is that you need to treat your folks that you're doing this stuff for like customers. So let's talk about that idea here. Let's develop that a little bit. When you walk into a brick and mortar today, you can order it cheaper on Amazon. We all know that. But we still walk into those brick and mortars. You're there for a reason. You might have something to do with supporting your community or just a personal distrust of the internet as a whole, but most likely you're there because you want some expertise. You want to talk to somebody who's going to help you make a purchase you're trying to make. Maybe you want to buy a piece of jewelry for somebody, and you don't have a clue where to start. You just look at it, I don't know anything about this stuff. And so you're looking for somebody to help you out. You're looking for that expertise. Maybe your teenager has just gotten really interested in cycling and it's time for that bicycle upgrade and you have no idea what to do. You want to walk into a store and be able to talk to somebody and then trust that they know how to help you. And there's the key. It's all about trust. So whether it's in-house or the out-house, this is your single biggest contribution you are going to work on to make your customers happy and content. It's trust. Build that, everything else will follow, I promise you. That is the number one thing. You got to build that trust. Now, every time you think about simplifying your process, taking a shortcut, making something easier on your process side, think about how that would look if you were the customer. Think about what the customer is going to say when they figure out you're doing that. Now, if you want to be super, super proactive, ask the customer first. Hey, what would you think if we did this? What if we were to eliminate this step in our process? Some guys might say yes, some guys might say no. Some folks might look at you and go, I didn't know that was a step in your process to begin with. Okay, it's easy at that point. It's, okay, you didn't know it was there in the first place. I'm getting rid of it. Easy enough. But, whenever you look at trying to tighten up your process, trying to do things differently, just think about that. Think about what the customer is going to think about it. Because I'm sorry to say this, but most folks do not look at their calibration certificates. They don't look at this stuff when they get it back. They don't touch it. They just ignore it. I've seen folks that get a whole packet of calibration certificates in an envelope and take the whole envelope and put it in their drawer and with a stack of other envelopes because they apparently never got called on it. And that's fine. That's what works for them. But sooner or later, there's going to be an issue and they're going to have to look at those certificates. So the problem here is that they may or may not know for a period of time that something that they didn't know about had gotten changed, that you've decided to change for whatever reason. And when they find this out and it turns out it's something they don't like, you're going to have a problem. And unfortunately, they're not going to find this right away. They're typically not going to find this for a period of time unless the trust is already broken down. Then they're going to find it right away because they're going to be looking every time. Most folks are going to just trust you to do what you do, and they don't look all the time. They don't look until they get hit, for the most part. There are some folks who do a lot of diligence and Good for them. I really appreciate you guys. You make all of us that are in this industry and all labs better for what you do. But you're the exception and unfortunately not the rule. So what's going to happen? They're going to be in the middle of an audit, 6 months, a year, 2 years later, have all these certs, find out there's something that was a problem that they don't like, that their auditor doesn't like, that their assessor says there's a problem with this and you need to get it fixed. Now they're going to have a lot of work to do. And you can bet your ass they ain't going to like that one bit. So think from this perspective, put yourself in this seat whenever you go to make changes, especially if you're making changes to simplify things from your end. It may look great to you, might not look so good from the customer side. Just, think about these things. Other things with the trust thing, ask questions. If you got a new customer or a new type of item for a customer, ask questions. If you're an in-house guy and they're trying to get some new stuff, ask questions, ask them up front, because a lot of times they're going to think that you know what they want without telling you what it is they want. You know this. And so just ask those questions, ask, and focus on building that trust. Focus on building relationships. Relationships are really key in this industry. They're key in any service industry whatsoever, but so much so in this one. People fire companies. People don't fire people. So when you build those relationships, people are going to be willing to work with you when it hits the rocks. And that's an important place to be when we look at these industries. So got the trust thing under the belt. Next thing, cost. This always comes up. Again, if you're an in-house or if you're not, if you're an outsourced provider, whatever, it's always going to come up, regardless of the actual cost. I'll tell you a little secret about the calibration world that not a lot of people are going to tell you. The cost of calibrations is based on consensus. Yes, you hear XYZ Lab is charging X to calibrate a pressure gauge, and you adjust your price to be closer to theirs. Typically in the upward direction. That's what happens in the industry. That's how it really works. Now, when we're dealing with the extremely large organizations, the big boys, the heavy hitters, they've done a bit more work on these things, especially when they talk about their high-end items. When you're paying these $3,000 and $4,000 calibration prices for specialized things with specialized processes, they've done a lot more work to put some time into figuring out what real costs are associated with that work. But for the most part, when we're dealing with the kind of low-end items, when we're talking about pressure gauges or torque wrenches or multimeters, it's consensus. Over the years, I've looked at it. I've looked at all the variables that go into these equipment. The equipment that's used itself, the equipment maintenance, technician experience level, frequency of adjustments. How often do we have to actually kind of get under the hood and mess around with one of these things? The time, the amount of time the service actually takes with or without adjustments. And for the most part, with most of these real common items, I find very little correlation overall. Very, very little. So what does that mean at that point? It means the cost is based on what the market will bear for a particular item. End of story. End of discussion. That's what we're looking at. Now, if you find a provider that's willing to do that same service for a significantly lower cost, you may want to ask why. They may have come up with a process, or they may just be trying to get their foot in the door. Who knows? But if they're significantly cheaper or significantly more expensive for that matter, if they're, just outside of the curve, ask why. They might have a really good reason. But for the most part, what you're going to see is lab to lab, you're going to see very little difference in cost. You're going to see similar costs. You're not going to see one lab charging $10 for a calibration and another lab charging $100 for the exact same calibration, typically. Now, they may calibrate the same item with that disparaging difference in cost. That, however, is not the same calibration necessarily. So, again, ask questions. When it comes down to it, when you go and start pricing these things out, labs against labs that are of similar capabilities, what you're typically going to find is once you add everything up, if you've got a significant list with some diversity in it, you're going to end up being very similar. It's just how it's going to typically work. So how do you deal with the question of that customer that's wanting it cheaper? Well, there's a couple ways, and one of my favorites, and I do it very professionally and very politely, but slightly tongue-in-cheek, is just ask them how much less of the calibration they'd like me to perform on their item. Now, I've done this before. Customer asking, hey, can't you do this cheaper? And I say, okay, sure. What functions on this would you not like me to calibrate? So on this device, what would you like me to skip over the calibration of? Just write them down here, sign off on this piece of paper, and guess what? At that point, they get a little nervous. They realize that they'd be responsible if there's a shortcoming, and usually say, never mind, just calibrate the whole damn thing. So, a little bit about cost, where it comes from, what it's all about. Time. Time is going to be one of the biggest issues that comes up with a lot of folks. Most labs really try to be very efficient with their time. However, when you look at it from the outside world, you go, why does this take a month? Well, for the most part, a lot of labs, we'll talk about this in a second, a lot of labs have cut down their time dramatically over the past several years. It's just been such a huge driver in the marketplace to get turnaround times down to much more reasonable levels of time. And what it comes down to is it's an issue of staffing. But what we've got is that most calibration labs want to be sufficiently staffed to have what they receive over an extended period of time in a reasonable amount of time. So what they're going to base their staff levels on are the number of calibrations that are done in a month or a quarter or a 6-month period or something like that. Then based upon that, they're going to look at what they want to be their turnaround time. Maybe it's 3 days, maybe it's a week, maybe it's a month. But what they're going to do then is average these things out so that the staff is able to maintain a constant pace. That's kind of the idea here, is to be able to smooth out the bumps that occur with the up and downs of the way amounts of things that our customers are sending in. And so if they had enough staff to calibrate everything on the day it came in, they would have some folks that were busy a couple days out of the month, quarter, year, and who would have absolutely nothing to do with the vast majority of their time the rest of the days. So, it is the old adage being true, time is money, and you know what? If you want to move to the front of the line, it's going to cost extra. That's life. You should expect that. But I am going to say that with a lot of the modern scheduling tools we have today, much, much better statistics being available to really better predict timing of all these things, the vast majority of third-party providers have gotten down to these 1 to 2 week turnarounds. I've seen folks that are maintaining even better than that for the vast majority of typical calibration items. So that brings us to the outsource question. Talked about that one at the top. We're coming right back to it at this point. Dealt with this one a lot over the years. So a couple of tips here if you're on the getting asked side of this question. First off, do not say no right away unless you're absolutely sure you can do absolutely nothing with it. If they're handing you a gas flow meter and you don't do gas flow meters, then okay, say no. However, it's better to, if possible, figure out what the customer expectation is, what they're looking for, what they are thinking of. We need to figure that out. Now, if they're handing this to you, most likely they think that you can do it or that you know how to do it or that you would have to outsource it. They're handing it to you with that expectation. So first off, ask what their expectation is. You'll get that question from the customer that says, hey, but you just did this last week. And you're like, no, I didn't. I don't do these. And then you'll find out, oh, yeah, they don't use it for all of that. They use it the same way that they use the thing that they sent you last week. So ask. I've had customers bring me grade 0 gauge blocks, and then they're actually expecting them just to be done to a shop grade sort of tolerance. They don't tell you that because you didn't ask. So it's all about communicate. So if you're on the receiving end of calibration services, know that the provider is always walking a tightrope. It's always about compliance, the equipment, personnel, and then, balancing profit in there too. You got to break even or a little better than that come the end of the day. Preferably a lot better than that so that you can continue to evolve as a lab and do more things and do better things and grow and be able to take care of even more and more for your customers. Taking care of all these pieces, making them fit together is a challenge at least, and it's stressful on its best day. I know that from a lot of experience. If you are providing calibration service, focus on building those relationships. Get back there to that trust. That trust thing fixes all the other issues. If you can get that trust thing, everything else will smooth itself out, I promise you. And when I talk about that, I'm reminded of watching a TV show with a relationship counselor years ago. And he sat there and said, it's really simple to do these things right. And he said, ask your partner what they want. Give it to them. After that, ask them if they liked it. And I quickly realized this is the best business advice I'd ever gotten in my life. So that's a little talk about stuff with running a calibration lab and just how some things work. I'm Kevin. Stop by the website, www.ptguruconsulting.com. Hit me up. Let me know what you think. Leave a note. Check out the ebook. Hit the whack ebook at the end to download that guy. I very much appreciate it. Scroll down. Hit me up on social. I hope you have a great week, and I'm going to talk at you on Monday. Thank you so much.